We acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation as the traditional owners of the lands on which this podcast is recorded. We pay our respects to elders and their descendants who continue in a long tradition of cultural and spiritual connection to country since time immemorial. We acknowledge the First Peoples and their continuing custodianship of the lands on which we work and live. We recognise their struggle and honour their contributions to current and future generations. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land. Welcome to the Reconnection Revolution. I'm your host, Celeste Halliday. In a world that often encourages us to play safe and stay small, we go deep and explore the big questions, the daily joys and chaos of life, and everything in between. Our goal? To help you find your spark if you feel like it's been dimmed, and ignite you if you're ready to create a reconnection revolution in your own life. Wherever you're at right now, I'm so glad that you're here with us. Hello and welcome to the Reconnection Revolution. Today I am thrilled to be speaking with James Gill, also known as Fish by his friends, and in fact I just found out Fishy by his very good friends. So James can tell us the story about where that nickname came from in a moment. James is a heart coach who is currently writing a book on all that he teaches, specifically to couples, around how to navigate relationship conflict so that they can have a more connected relationship. And I've personally worked one-on-one with Fish to better understand my own patterns of conflict and how to help navigate my way out of those and have better relationships too. A lot of our content and what we work on in the world is really aligned, and I'm super excited to share Fish's thinking with you today. Welcome.
So am I, Celeste. I'm really excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Now, you have to explain your nickname because it's always asked. Every time I've ever heard you speak, everyone always asks where Fish comes from. So it would be remiss of me not to ask you.
So rewind 45 years to when I was 6 years old and I was in the playground with my year one buddies. And my friend Mike called me Fish because he was making a joke about my surname. And to start with, I felt like I was being teased. But very quickly, it just became something that felt very comfortable for me. If you call me James, it is technically correct, but I won't necessarily respond because because it's very unfamiliar to me. All my people call me Fish, and my closest, nearest and dearest call me Fishy.
It's lovely. It's a term of endearment. I mean, the nickname I was given at primary school that rhymes with Celeste was a lot less flattering. You can probably do the maths on that. So I didn't hang on to that one. It didn't feel like a term of endearment to me.
I think the little 6-year-old me just wanted to feel special and seen. Yeah. And a nickname like Fish actually sort of was very memorable to people. You know, so it became a real little sort of reassurance that I mattered in the world. I was memorable, I was seen, I was remembered. Which brings us perfectly to, I guess, the fundamental premise, really, you tell me, but of both of our work, which is that our greatest human need is to be seen, heard and valued for who we authentically are. I couldn't agree more. You know, at the foundation of all the conflict that I've ever seen in any kind of relationship, not just romantic relationship, but relationship with siblings and parents and kids and friends and colleagues. The upset that we experience at the bottom of relationship rupture is always not feeling recognized, not feeling loved, not feeling understood, not feeling acknowledged. And that's the foundation for connection. And when we can restore a sense of both parties being deeply understood and recognized for the very real experience that they're having, magic happens. In fact, that is the magic that you speak of when anyone works with you, about the incredible, it's magic where you can speak with somebody in a way that maybe you didn't learn in your family growing up, and instead of it creating more conflict
and more analysis of the issue, it creates a connection with the other person or between you, and empathy starts to flow both ways.
What we don't immediately understand about conflict, it's very common, even dependable, that we relate to conflict as moments where something's wrong.
Yeah.
But when you have mastery at really understanding what's going on in conflict, we can start to see each of our relationship upsets as being the very opportunity to take our relationship deeper.
Yeah. Yeah.
Opportunities don't come along in peacetime. That's where in peacetime, we just kind of plateau. We just ride the high of our connection. But in the midst of conflict, that's actually how we create deeper trust, deeper understanding, and deeper emotional intimacy.
And we see this play out in our intimate relationships with friends, and definitely in the workplace. You know, whenever I'm working with leaders and organisations and looking at their culture, often businesses will talk to me about how we can have a more trust-based culture, a culture where we can have what I call gritty conversations that don't result in, you know, what's seen as personality clashes, where people get personally affected by what's going on, that we can kind of disarm some of those conversations to still have connections that actually grow something. And I think that's your point, is that really when we're not able to manage that break, bridge, rebuild type of process with each other, that we get very stuck and just avoid any kind of movement or deepening in the relationship.
Yeah, it's when we go through upsetting times, and let's face it, our greatest upsets are when other people seem to have done something that feels so hurtful, so unfair, so critical, so judgmental, so uncaring, so unthoughtful.
Yeah.
Very easy, because we haven't learnt the skills to transform the moment. I don't just mean reach an agreement. I actually mean transform the entire thing, change
Yes.
our understanding of the moment. Because we haven't learnt those skills, then we either lash out with our expressions of our pain, and that goes poorly because, we'll all know those moments of expressing our pain directly to someone, and they get angry, they feel hurt, they shut off, they get defensive. None of that we want. We actually want their present open heart to express our pain into, because that would feel like being cared for, that would feel like connection. So we either lash out, or more likely, because lashing out never goes well, or because we've even tried to skillfully speak our upset and someone gets reactive or defensive, then we kind of give up. And so we sentence ourselves to relationships where we know that we're not going to be heard. And then we cultivate this kind of resentment, and I guess if we look into the workplace, a lot of the corporate work that I used to do, inevitably people would be sitting with resentment towards their managers, feeling not recognized, feeling not heard, not understood about very real upsets that they were experiencing. And so they just slid into, screw my boss, they never want to understand me, they're not interested, they're controlling, etc. So there's two pathways: either speaking our needs and it going badly, or not speaking our needs and sliding towards resentment and disconnection. They're very well-worn pathways, not just in our work life, but in our personal life and all over the planet.
Yeah.
You'll hear those two pathways happening in the global upset right now.
Absolutely.
If neither of those approaches work, then we need another approach. And that's what I teach. It's how to speak our needs in a way that opens hearts, and how to receive someone else speaking their needs such that we stay open and present to them. Because when those two pathways are open, then what we have is a relationship in which unmet needs get articulated and can be worked towards meeting. And that is connection.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. In fact, the most compelling part of when I was reading about you before we worked together was that you said something along the lines of, it can just be one person. So you could be coming with issues in your family, in your intimate relationship, in your workplace. It doesn't really matter because, you know, the way I've always thought about relationships is a bit like a dance. And when we first meet each other very quickly, we set the rules of the dance. I do this, then you do that, then I do this. And there's sort of these expectations of how we're supposed to communicate and connect. And often they turn into negative pathways and we have the same sort of negative dance. So this compelling offer I read in, you know, the work that you do was to become more skillful, a term I absolutely love, instead of bad, good. It's just about skill and learning skill to be able to affect positive change in any relationship, just me, without even having to get the other person to do that same work, if you're going to call it work.
Yeah. So many people approach me and say, look, I love what you speak about. I love the tools that you teach, but you know what? My person doesn't want to do it with me. So it turns out that we can't get your support. And what that speaks to is, as you're talking to, is a very firmly held belief that in order for a relationship to transform, it takes two people. And actually, it's simply not the case, because as soon as I can bring loving awareness to you, your experience and my experience, and that you know how much effort and work that takes to do and all the barriers, which we can go into. But as soon as I can, in any moment of upset, if I can wrap your experience in loving awareness and my experience in loving awareness, something will transform and you haven't had to do anything. Why that's useful is because if we really get honest about conflict moments, they are characterized by an absence of mutual willingness. So if what I taught required both parties to calmly sit down with a cup of tea and lovingly invest in the tools, they would be so unpowerful, because when does that ever happen? Like, it only happens when you're back in peacetime.
Yeah.
So, yeah, this idea of actually transforming. And so what we're doing with the tools that I teach is we're changing the ground on which you and I are standing. We're going from the ground of who's right and wrong and whose fault it is, and the ground of speaking our analysis and their counter-analysis. And we're shifting the ground to be, I'm speaking my experience and welcoming in your experience. There's no blame. Blame has been dissolved. My accountability will evoke your accountability, just the way that my blame evoked your blame. And to understand this a little more deeply, if I may, you know, I call this work conscious communication. The word conscious has become used very widely in kind of spiritual and self-development circles. And so just to specify what I mean by conscious, I mean bringing awareness to things that we're usually completely unaware of. So making conscious what is naturally unconscious. And when we get really clued in, we start to see all the ways in which we are unintentionally, unconsciously creating opposition between us and others in every moment of conflict. Once we can see what we're doing and thinking and saying that creates that opposition, then we can stop doing it, and we naturally lead the relationship back to the ground of mutual open-heartedness. I was telling this story again the other day, but I had a client of mine ring me recently and say, you know, she's a few months down the track of completing the coaching with me. And she said, Fish, I just had to tell you, I had a conversation with my husband the other day in the garden, and I thought I hadn't done very well because he didn't really respond. He just looked at me and turned away and kept on gardening. But she said, I was so thrilled. A few hours later, he came in. So remember, she'd done the coaching, he hadn't. He came in to me, she said, and in the kitchen, he put his arms around me and said, whatever you just did, can we do more of that?
Yeah, absolutely.
He gets to be opened by what she's done
Yeah.
without him ever having to use any tools.
Yeah.
And people say to me sometimes, yeah, but Fish, why am I always having to be the one? And I say, you don't. Like, you really don't. Don't use the tools when you don't want to. But if you're really committed to connection instead of being right, then every time you use them, something will shift.
And it sounds a little bit, theoretical. What I found, I mean, it's incredibly practical. Probably, I think I was surprised going through the process about how hard and deep the work is. And yes, there's reflection like you'd expect in a psychotherapy, a therapist, counselling relationship. But this is sitting down with a framework or a model and writing and writing and writing from your perspective and deeply understanding the other person's perspective. And what's so transformative about that, I found, was I healed historic relationship issues with family, with various people. They don't know anything about it. All they know is that the relationship dynamic has shifted so much.
Celeste is somehow showing up differently, and I don't know quite how, but this is great.
And it shifts the energy in the relationship in a completely un-woo-woo way. I deeply understand what I brought to this. Even if I felt like I was the victim, and I'd love to talk to you about victim villain, I was the one that was hurt, I was the one that something bad happened to. And yet I'm able to heal that without having ever spoken with you about it.
And notice that I never asked you to turn away from your very, very real pain. If you're looking on my Instagram account, if you're new to my Instagram account, you might hear my messages of radical compassion to all beings as if I'm saying that we should just be okay with what people have done to us.
Yes.
And not at all. The pain that we have experienced in relationship with others needs to be wrapped in loving awareness until our dying breath. Like, let's not ever turn away from that. It's just that one of the unconscious pathways that we have is because I was hurt by what you did and you acted consciously. It's not like you're a puppet that someone else was operating. You did a thing with full awareness around the thing you were doing, and it really hurt me or left me feeling unappreciated or blamed or criticized or physically harmed. My unconscious assumption is, if I hurt and it's because you did that thing, you wanted to hurt me.
Yeah.
That mistake of the mind is the reason the world is at war. I call it assumed ill intent or assumed malicious intent. And so if we dive into that a little more, did you have any sort of recognitions or realizations in the work that we did? I know I'm putting you on the spot totally here.
Oh, no, I could talk about it for hours. But one, that some of the things that have really stuck with me are the skill, the ability to deeply validate myself to the point where I don't need the other person to validate how horrible it's been for me, the hurt they caused me, whatever it may be. Great if they do, but I actually don't need them to do that, which immediately changes the dynamic of the interaction. And I think two of your most powerful words, I don't know if you know your most powerful words, you might, but that you teach are, of course, which I now use all the time and obviously attribute to you. Of course, I feel awful about what happened. Of course, I feel devastated, hurt, betrayed, whatever. That makes sense. I don't have to avoid that. In fact, I can sit deeply with how awful that has been for me and validate myself without ever really needing you to say, yes, I did that thing and here's why I did it and all the explanations that come.
I mean, it's also wonderful when in relationship with someone, they can bring their emotions to our very real upset, particularly if they've done things over time. Of course, we want their attunement. It's just that we can't guarantee that we'll ever get it. And if we're stuck in expecting acknowledgement from someone about our value and pain, two things happen. We imprison ourselves in our disappointment.
Yeah.
And we imprison them in our resentment.
Yeah.
And the mechanism of conflict is locked there.
Yeah.
You're the bad person, and I can't feel okay until you do what you're refusing to do. And so my power to heal lies at your feet. So instead of getting stuck in that, which is, it's very natural, you recognize it as one of the symptoms of the conflict mind, which makes love to this story that says, look how wronged I've been by you. And we can stay stuck in there our whole life, right? So instead of that pathway, what you were able to do was, first of all, validate your very real pain. Whatever someone did that caused you pain, of course you feel that way. You have every right to have all of those feelings. And, in that process of acknowledging our very real pain, we find that we're not even aware of the extent of our pain. We're too busy lost in our analysis of other people to even recognize that, wow, I felt ashamed. I also felt hurt. I feel a little bit guilty about how I reacted. I also feel really super angry. I feel a taste of hatred. Like, giving ourselves permission to have the depth and complexity of our experience of pain is a huge thing, because we tend to turn away from recognizing our own pain. This is how we sort of abandon or gaslight, if we want to use a pop psychology term, gaslight ourselves. So first step is recognizing our pain. What that does over time is it opens us to start to inquire, if they didn't want this pain for me and this pain for me is true, I wonder what they might have actually been hoping for. What was their tender human heart really yearning for and hoping for in the very hurtful things that they did? I've discovered 3 profound questions to ask. And those of your listeners who sit there going, yeah, but Fish, what about people who are actually just bad and wrong for what they've done? Here are 3 very powerful questions. And, if you don't want to accept this offer, feel free not to. You can stay where you are, and I'm not going to challenge you on it.
Yeah.
3 questions behind what appears as malicious intent are these. Question number 1. What pain were they trying to have expressed through what they did? What was it an attempt to express the pain of? Not condoning the behavior, recognizing that it was a very unskillful expression of some very real pain that they were sitting with, that the heart needed to have seen. And I can think of a whole lot of things that I've said to humans in my life, and a whole lot of things that have been said to me in the heat of the moment that fall under that first category.
Yeah.
We just wanted our pain expressed.
Yeah.
I even do it to myself. If I walk into a doorway, which I seem to do a lot, and I'm walking through a threshold and my shoulder hit, I'm like, oh, fuck. It's like the need to express pain is very human. Question 2, what pain were they hoping, in their actions, were they hoping to get out of, avoid, or minimize? I listened to a very beautiful podcast with Tara Brock.
Yes.
She's a profound teacher, and she was talking about how naturally in nature, deception is employed by nature all around us.
Yes.
Butterflies with big eyes painted on them, things that can hide or conceal or change.
Chameleons.
Yes. And deception is an example of number 2, where deception is trying to get out of the risk of some great pain or danger. And I'm not suggesting that it's at all okay in relationship to deceive one another, because, of course, look at the pain that it creates. We'll never turn away from that. Of course, it's painful to be deceived. It's just that it's very human to try to deceive in order to maintain some less painful state.
Yeah.
And I can think of deceptions that I've brought in my relationships and ways I've been deceived that were a good example of number two. Someone trying to avoid the inevitable upset that might come unless something was concealed. Unskillful action, but based on a longing in the heart to be out of upset or to minimize or avoid potential risk or danger or upset or judgment or being cast out. And the third, perhaps the most sort of insightful or powerful behind really malicious things, is question number three: what pain were they hoping to have tasted by us, such that if we tasted their pain, they might suddenly feel more attuned to or less alone in their very real pain? Once again, I'm not condoning the actions taken by human beings based on that third motivator.
Yeah.
But how human is it? Think of all the ways in which you have really wanted someone to just have a tiny little taste of what it's been like for you, because if they tasted it, finally you get it. After all this time, you really get what it's been like for me.
Yeah.
Actually, no, I'll tell a more personal story. My beautiful ex-wife, she and I have a wonderful friendship and continue to clean up our relationship even 12 years after our divorce. I feel very fortunate for her commitment to our relationship. And we share two beautiful kids together. But there's been so many times, particularly after the divorce, where she would say or do things with the distinct intention of letting me taste what she was going through.
Yeah.
And at the time, I just thought she was being vindictive and horrible and malicious and nasty. And I was like, who is this woman that I used to love, and how could she be so malicious? But what she was really trying for is, I need you to recognize the extraordinary pain that I'm standing in, because I need to feel cared for and attuned to by you in my pain. And so if we deeply dive into those three questions, and let's start with ourselves, actually.
That's right.
Always a good place to start in this work is start with our own self-reflection into our own humanness. And when we go deeply into recognizing that we've done all those three things, done hurtful things to people to try and express some pain, hurtful things to people to try and get out of some pain that might be avoided, or some hurtful thing to try and have someone feel the pain that we were in so we felt attuned to. If we really tune into that humanness, our capacity to just naturally judge other people softens. And then we just see humanness in them. And we can still be nowhere near their behavior. Like, I often ask the question, at what distance?
Yes.
Can you stay compassionate with someone? Is it zero contact? You have every right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is it occasionally seeing them but not revealing your heart? That's cool. You decide. So I'm not suggesting that, when I'm looking at chapter 4 of my book called Repair.
Yep.
One of the questions I'm writing about is like, what does repair actually look like? It doesn't have to be in close romantic relationship or in close proximity. It doesn't have to be that way. Repair, from my perspective, is, can I hold me and them in deep compassion? And then from decide where I need to orientate myself, up close or far away, such that I can hold that compassionate place for them and for me.
I think we call it boundaries a lot now, don't we? There's a lot of talk with our newfound love of psychological language and labeling. And, I'm a big believer in boundaries, but I like the idea of distance. There's somebody in my life post our work together who I don't have a lot of contact with by choice because I need distance from them. But when I do have that chosen contact, I feel fine about it. Whereas when I had more contact and hadn't done the work, it felt like I was putting myself into pain's pathway.
Yeah, beautiful. A really lovely way to consider boundaries is under what conditions
Yeah.
can I stay holding myself with compassion and love and holding you with compassion and love?
Yeah.
And if the conditions aren't met, I tend to fall out of that compassionate space into feeling hurt or criticized or judged or blaming you.
Yeah.
Conditions that I need. Another important aspect of boundaries is I recently recorded a podcast interview with a wonderful woman called Carly, and we were discussing this notion of boundaries as distinct from barriers.
Mm.
Barriers are things that we tend to just put in place regardless of how someone else feels about it. It's just like, here's my determination about this relationship, and you either respect it or don't.
Yeah.
But what we find is when we're putting barriers in place like that, is we will naturally create or generate opposition in the other person. Think of any time that you might have said, Mum, I just need you to not use that language with me, or I just need you to call before you visit, Mum, right?
Yeah.
What you will be met with is, sorry, all the mums in the world. Very commonly, there are boundary issues between people and their mums.
Mm.
What we're aiming to do, actually, instead of generating opposition, instead of my boundary with mum leaving her feeling hurt, misunderstood, and villainized, and like she has to somehow be bad or wrong for her behavior. Instead, what we're looking for in boundary setting is mutual value. So if we go back to, a moment where I've felt pain and I've realized what they were yearning for was something distinct from my pain. I'll give the example of conversation with my ex-wife. I might say, she's hung up on me in the midst of a conflict, and I feel hung up on, I feel shut down, shut out, and judged and made wrong, and hurt and angry and sad. In boundary setting, first of all, I have to recognize the deeper truth of the moment. So I have to say, look at how upset I felt: angry, sad, confused, hurt, shut out, shut down, made wrong. And look at what she was actually hoping for. What does hanging up on me, what's her heart yearning for in hanging up on me? Clearly, now that I've had a lot of practice at this, and it might not be clear to your listeners, but clearly my wife is longing for me to understand the extent to which she's upset.
Yeah.
How does this feel, buddy?
She's expressing it.
So now I'm not condoning the behavior. In fact, I'm wanting to address the behavior. I'm wanting to say, don't you dare hang up on me. But if I say it that way, she'll be like, screw you, you deserved it. So instead, I have to say, look at the pain it brought me. Look at what you were actually hoping for. Let's work on a way that you get to be expressed in your upset to me, my dear one, without leaving me feeling so shut out. Because I know you didn't want me to feel shut out. I know you wanted me to feel into your pain.
That's right.
We need to find a way such that you get to be fully expressed in some upset when it's there for you, in such a way as I don't feel shut out and shut down.
Yeah.
And in that conversation, she naturally said, thank you for seeing what I was hoping for. I'm really sorry. That was an unskillful way to tell you I was hurting. And I said, what about next time you can say directly to me, I'm really upset and I just need you to listen.
Yeah.
I'm really upset and I need to come back to this. And she was like, okay, well, let's try that. So that's become our pathway now, is instead of her hanging up on me, she says to me, this is a moment where I really need you to understand how upset I am. Why that's mutually held is because the value for her is that she gets to fulfill on what she was yearning for.
Yeah.
Put in her pain. And the value for me is I get to receive her upset in a way that feels more palatable, that I can stay open to.
Yeah.
Both my pain and her yearning in that moment actually get to be acknowledged.
Taken care of.
Some are unmet needs that need meeting. She needs to be expressed in her pain with me to have a trusting relationship with me. And I need to feel honored and respected enough to not be hung up on.
Yeah.
And so if I can present that mutual value, then she goes, yeah, that sounds great, because I actually want to feel understood, and I actually don't want you to feel like more angry and more shut off to me. I actually want you. And I say, well, that's good, because I actually want you to be expressed and feel trusting in this relationship. And I also don't want to feel hung up on. So can you hear the mutual value in that?
Yeah, absolutely.
But going back a step, we can't really set boundaries that stick if we're not willing to recognize that there's a my experience and a your experience, and both of them need to be recognized.
Which is really such a hard part of the work. Because in order to feel, I find that in whether it's my own personal conflict or when I'm coaching people or in a workplace culture, however it works or nets out, that there's a pace that comes with conflict. When we talk about escalating, it's exactly what it is. So I'm then needing you to see my pain more quickly. So I'm forcing my perspective. And meanwhile, you're doing the same to me. And the brilliance of this, model, part of it is that I've created enough space that I can slow down enough, because I validated myself first, to actually be able to hear what you're saying without reacting, jumping all over it and escalating.
Yes. In conflict, if we had a map of awareness or a brain scan of the width of our awareness, like what we were perceiving, in conflict, our awareness shrinks.
Yeah.
Zip right into a tiny little ball. And where our awareness shrinks to is our assessment of the moment.
Yes.
Not even our experience of the moment.
No.
Emotions. We're often not clued into our emotions. We've just got this very clear, it's like she's being a controlling bitch.
Yeah, exactly.
It's that clear. Or he's being selfish again. So the mind just shrinks and fastens onto our analysis, our assessment. Yeah. And from that place, I will naturally speak my assessment. If I open my mouth, what will come out is analysis.
Yeah.
My analysis will create a counter-analysis in you. If I'm in conflict and I say, why do you have to be such a controlling cow?
Yeah.
You will naturally say, how on earth was that being controlling? So we've suddenly created a me versus you. And the more I fight to be understood, the more I naturally, unintentionally leave you feeling dismissed in your experience. And so the more you fight for your experience to be understood via your analysis, the more you'll leave me feeling completely misunderstood. And like you say, it has a momentum to it.
Yeah.
Talk about conflict as being like an avalanche.
Yes.
One particle shifted, and then two, and then four, and then eight, and then
so
suddenly the whole mountainside has collapsed onto the village below. And we're both looking at each other thinking, well, it wasn't me, it must have been you.
Yeah.
Neither of us intended the escalation. So from this contracted awareness, the tools that I teach are about expanding our awareness.
Yeah.
You know how much work that takes, because it will always be our habit to contract. To reach for the tools. It's the only way I've ever found to do it. Reach for the tools, and the tools just really simply say, what was my experience? And what was your experience?
Yep.
That's not what the mind ever wants to do. But as soon as that can happen, you and I can both get awareness wrapped around what's very true and alive for us in every moment. All of our upset, all of our pain, and all of what we were actually hoping for. So when I talk about yearning, it's really the goodness in us behind everything we've ever done. Even the shittiest things we've done, the heart was wanting to feel a certain way.
Yeah.
By doing that thing. And when we can both have our pain recognized and our yearning or our longing recognized, then hearts spontaneously open.
And it's okay to be able to see that in ourselves. You know I can look at myself and say, of course, that's what I was yearning for. Of course, I was just expressing my anger and frustration, which was completely reasonable given the situation. But when we have to do that for another person, we think that it's totally unreasonable behaviour that they would behave in that way, even though we might in another situation. Yeah, yeah.
I've been writing recently about our natural self-centeredness. Now, spiritual traditions teach this all the time. The Buddhist faith very much works with, Buddhist practices work very much with noticing our attachment to our own sense of self.
Yeah.
But even without an understanding of that perspective, can you notice that you and I and everyone on the planet, since we were born, have seen life with us as the main character?
That's right.
Everyone else has been playing a bit part, some right up close and significant, some in the distance. Everyone's a bit part compared to us. We're at the center of it. And out there in the world, the term self-centered has actually come across as like a judgment that we cast on people.
That's right.
That's hilarious because actually it's our true nature. It's our biological nature to be self-centered.
Yeah.
And it's through recognizing our self-centeredness that we can start to see that we view an upset moment from our experience, and our experience naturally takes precedent, and their experience is beyond our view.
Yeah.
Naturally, not because we're uncaring or nasty or unwilling even. It's just naturally lies beyond our view. In the same way as if I go out into my backyard and I hear a noise over the neighbour's fence, it's only when I peer over the neighbour's fence that I can see what
it is.
So self-centeredness will always leave us with the conclusion that we're a bit right, a bit more valid than they are.
Yes.
If the truth be told, some of our conflicts, we get so certain about our perspective that we fail to recognize that we can't see the whole truth.
Yeah. Yeah.
We think our experience is real. In fact, we just think our analysis is real. But we have to expand into what's the experience I'm having and what's the experience they're having. When you think of it, that must be what the truth is comprised of, because there's two of us having experiences.
Yeah.
Turns out that our experiences are radically different often.
And how does a 5-year-old fish get on this journey and develop this model? What happened in your life? And I'd love you to also answer, how has it changed your relationships?
What happened in my life has just been this cascade of events that up until recently really didn't make sense to me and were really actually very quite painful. A lot of loss, a lot of very confusing relationship breakdown, a lot of feelings of loneliness and shame, ineffective relating, paired with a very deeply feeling heart.
Yeah.
That I think was really nurtured by a father who was prepared to be very emotionally expressive and very loving and very thoughtful and very curious about the world. But it really has been, there's a chapter in my book talking about those that I've loved and hurt and lost.
Yeah.
And those that I've been hurt by and loved by. And those humans in not just in romantic relationship, but in parenting relationships, in friendships, those humans have been my teachers.
Yeah.
And what has come through that great pain is starting to recognize that behind, because I just didn't want to stay in feeling like the world had treated me poorly.
Yeah.
I didn't believe it. I didn't believe that could be the conclusion. And so inquiring more deeply into my humanness and their humanness, suddenly the back end, like a back end of a website, the back end of humanness, the back end of conflict started to become illuminated. And now if I'm sitting in a cafe and I overhear some conversation with conflict, even if it's covert conflict, like someone just leaving the table feeling dissatisfied with the service but not saying anything.
Yeah.
I just hear it as the yearning and pain in all human hearts.
Yes.
And I have to remind myself that my intervention is not welcome.
You're just going to go and interrupt all the people and tell them how to make it better.
I actually feel like sitting down and just stepping through the four truths and liberating both humans. Every time I step people through those four truths, my yearning, your pain, your yearning, my pain, liberation happens. It's never not worked. So I have to really sort of hold myself back from it and just leave people to their own particular pathway in conflict unless they want to know differently.
Yeah.
It's hard for me to know whether people do or don't want to do it differently, you know.
Yeah.
For all of us, we get a bit bound up in the drama.
Yeah.
There's something, coming back to your question about victim, we haven't really gone there, but there's something deeply fulfilling,
Absolutely.
like nourishing, like a good meal,
Yep.
about being the one who's definitely in people's favor through being the hurt party.
Yep.
It's much better to be the victim than it is to be perceived as the villain.
Yeah.
And we can see conflict as an unconscious race to be the victim, not the villain.
Exactly.
So we'll fight over whose victimhood is stronger and and we do, because we don't want to be the villain, because being seen as the villain is actually like, it's like, think back to when human beings lived in tribes and outside the walls of the village was death because there were huge predators. That's how we've lived most of our existence as a human race. So to be seen as the villain risks being cast out.
Yeah.
And so our nervous system still detects it as the threat of death.
Death. Yeah.
We fight not to be the villain. So we fight to make the other person the villain because we have this hardwired notion that there's a victim and a villain. So it's pretty compelling, and it's okay. You know, I authentically mean this. It's really okay if, you know, there's listeners out there who go, I wouldn't be prepared to engage in conscious communication if it meant that I had to let go of my story of victimhood.
That story.
You and I know that the pathway of conscious communication doesn't ever ask us to turn away from our very real pain. In fact, we become, one, more masterful at acknowledging it.
Yeah.
Two, more masterful at bringing loving awareness to it so we feel like released from it. And three, more masterful at communicating it with people with whom we want to be understood.
Yeah.
So actually, it's the only pathway to healing. Victimhood keeps us sort of making love to our pain.
Which is very tempting. You know, I can sit here saying, having learned the tools and continually trying to work harder on them, it's absolutely, I get stuck in it. It's comforting, compelling, and you know, the world reinforces it for us as well.
We are trained in this dual mode, like a binary switch. If I'm not condemning, then I must be condoning.
Condoning it. Yeah.
And if it's caused me pain, there's no way I'm going to condone it, because that would be to turn away from myself.
Yeah.
So then I have to condemn it. And I get so many messages from when I speak about a radically compassionate viewpoint to ourselves and others. People say, how dare you condone abusive behavior? And really, that's just an indication that until you dive into this work,
that's right.
Actually says, if I'm not condoning, I'm condemning. This work doesn't do either. This work recognizes that our pain is real. They were wanting something distinct from our pain. Both of those are true. They're radically incongruent. And once we can bring loving awareness to both of those things, something starts to transform. Just in the same way as all the pain that we've ever caused other people, we never actually really wanted for them.
No.
Our yearning, what we're actually hoping for, and the very real pain that comes alive in them, both of those coexist. But coming back to your question about how has it changed my life, I just got a message from my ex-wife. Her ears must have been burning. How it's changed my life is that it makes grieving very painful situations richer and truer and less painful. I'm grieving the end of a romantic relationship right now, and I can see the beautiful yearning in her tender heart behind everything she's done and everything she's currently doing.
Yeah.
And I can see the extraordinary pain that certain loving things or valid things that I was hoping for in our relationship created for her. And I can see the depth of my longing for our love to continue and to get stronger. And I can see the depth of my own pain. And so it dissolves the natural notion for me to see either me or her as the bad guy.
Yeah.
It has afforded me, like you were saying at the start, it has led me to peace in certain situations that have happened to me that I can't change and that caused me enormous pain. It's left me feeling deeply connected to the humanness between me and them. It's left me requiring no acknowledgement or closure from anyone, which is handy because a lot of those situations are such that I could never get closure from about. They're not in a position to give it. And, my book is called How to Fall in Love with Humanity. And that's what's happened for me. Because even in the most horrendous situations in the world, I can still feel the humanness behind what's happening, behind what people are yearning for, behind what they do, and behind the suffering of the recipient of those actions. And so I just see humanness. So it's a benign worldview.
Yeah.
And it's very typical for us as humans to have a very fearful worldview, as if some people are just bad and evil. That's 99.9% of the population would think that some people are just evil. And I stand in a place now where I know for me, in my heart, that is absolutely not the truth about any human being.
And it's incredible because the energy, that conflict, those hurts, that pain take just on a daily basis from us when we're hanging on to them is huge. And when that, dynamic that you might have been thinking about over and over in your head, like a boxing match or replaying things or thinking about how you can change it and fix things, when that goes, there's peace.
Yes.
And that's an incredible thing. I don't think we know how to get peace in our current busy, conflict-ridden lives.
Everything's me versus you.
Yeah.
Given that model, which is what all of us have mostly been trained in,
Yeah.
then peace has to be found either by making someone else wrong or by making us wrong.
Yeah.
Neither of those bring peace. Well, finding resolution and peace beyond the realm of right and wrong
Yeah.
is that we do find peace. Like you've experienced that in your own process with me. I've experienced that time and time again. Every time I reach for the tools, I find peace.
Yeah.
And clarity in expressing my needs, by the way, not just rolling over and being okay with everything. But what else we find is actually it's very common for people. It happens around about week 5 in a 9-week coaching program, group coaching program with me. Invariably, people get on the call and I say, how are we all going with this work? And people start to say, Fish, is it normal to feel deeply grief-stricken?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Like nodding, and I say, tell me more. And they say, well, I'm just looking back on every moment of conflict in my life and I'm going, oh my God,
Yeah.
I couldn't see what my mind and their mind were doing. And if only,
Yeah.
rewind 20 years, if only I'd had this perspective, I could have been growing love instead of opposition.
That's right.
And we just never realize until we realize the truth under all conflict is the presentation of unmet needs. So it's very common when we stand in a very compassionate place towards ourselves and towards all beings, that we are struck by this like tidal wave of grief, because then we start to recognize if every human being on the planet had access to this work right now, all wars would stop.
Yeah.
Millions of lives would be saved simply by recognizing my experience and your experience coexist. So, yes, it's liberating. It's also fairly confronting.
It's really confronting. Anyone who's listening and thinks this is an easy ride, learn some tools, figure out life, that is not the process. It puts me in mind of the Rumi quote, help me out if you also know it, but out past my wrongdoing and your doing, there is a field. I'll meet you there.
Beyond the field, beyond wrong and right.
Yeah, yeah.
It's not, I'm not, sometimes my message can come across as if I'm telling people they're wrong. What I'm really trying to show is a layer underneath. And when everyone sees it, when anyone I've ever introduced to it sees it, they're like, oh.
Who knew? Yeah.
And it really is a deep sense. People message me and say, I feel like what you're saying is what I've always felt but never had words to. And I say to them, I'm not teaching you anything new. I'm teaching you what your heart knows.
Yeah.
Just that I'm giving you relief. Mind creates these narratives that leads us away from a deeper knowing. In the work that you did in your relationships, your heart knew what was true for the hearts of others.
Yeah.
The idea of heart-led communication can sound very fluffy and fairy flossy, like we just have to be all kind with people, but actually it's fierce work, isn't it?
It is fierce. It's brutal, brutal to ourselves and grief. And yeah, it's a process.
It's not brutal in the sense of we don't ever have to make ourselves wrong.
No.
We're actually honoring ourselves and honoring all people. But it's confronting in terms of what we have to recognize.
That's right.
In ourselves about what our mind does.
Yeah.
The stories our mind tells and how compulsively we are addicted to them. Stories our mind tells about other people. One final little thing is that
yes,
it's a beautiful thing to realize that, because once we start to recognize how drastically we judge other people without ever knowing, without ever feeling into the very real experience they're having, we can feel a bit bad and wrong about that, right? But that's just being all judgmental about our own judgment. That's not helpful. So what can be really helpful is considering that every time I'm judging someone else, say if I think someone's uncaring or unaware, right? They're three of my favorite judgments to make on people.
Yeah, I like them too.
What I'm really doing is, in comparison to them, I'm reassuring myself that I'm compassionate, caring, and aware.
Yes.
See how what I'm really trying to do behind my judgments of others is soothe myself.
That's exactly right.
And try to protect myself from being seen as unaware, critical, judgmental, uncaring. Once we can start to see that the mind is actually protecting us, trying to protect our identity, trying to have us safe and not cast out, then even the conflict mind and its compulsion to rule, we can even have compassion for that and just say, thank you for trying to protect me by judging me in comparison to someone else. Thank you for trying to set me up to be safe and okay and not cast out.
We could talk about this all day, and I would love to, but you have a book to write. For anyone listening who wants to find out more information, obviously your book is coming, but I really highly recommend, if you're wanting to radically revolutionize the conflict you experience in your relationships, and I would say the world at large, then this is the work for you. How do people reach you? We'll put it in our show notes, but where's the best place to find out more?
I do a little bit of one-on-one coaching, but primarily my energy is focused on group coaching now with people all over the world online. So people can find my work on Instagram, James_fish_Gill, and on the web at leadbyheart.com. And a really good place to start is go to my website, click on the podcast tab, and just dive into listening to the discussions like this one. And that's a good place to start because it's free. It will give you a sense of who I am and how I work and the kind of relationship conflicts that this is applicable to, which is every single moment of upset that's ever happened since the dawn of time. Yeah, and on my Instagram, I try to share tools and perspectives that support my clients. So that's also a good place to start because that's also free. Also, I train facilitators in this approach now as well.
Yes, that's right.
Trained my first cohort of 9, and I've got 2 more trainings coming up in the next few months. So that's exciting because spreading growing a cohort of people who are going to lead this work in the world is important because one day I'm going to fall off the perch, and I just want compassionate understanding to keep radiating.
Yeah, and scale is the way to do that. So it starts to become what we do.
The compassionate approach that I teach, it's not a sexy thing. It doesn't go viral, because it's not. What goes viral tends to be things that are radically oppositional. So my work radiates really through, people like you who are committed to this work being brought to the planet and being willing to invite me on and share more about your perspective. So I'm really grateful. Thanks for inviting me in.
Thank you for being here. It's been a great conversation. Really appreciate your time, and good luck with the book because I'm looking forward to reading it.
Thanks, Celeste.
Thank you for joining us on the Reconnection Revolution. We hope today's episode has ignited a spark within you, reminding you of the power of genuine connection. As we wrap up, remember that your support means the world to us. To stay connected with our vibrant community and never miss an episode, be sure to hit that subscribe button. And if you've found value in our conversations and stories, we would love to hear from you. Please leave us a review and let us know what you loved, what you hated, what you want more of, so that we can empower and inspire more people just like you. Until next time, keep curious, keep questing, keep connecting, and remember, we really are all in this together.